So listen to this. Who is the greatest ever player that never won the Ballon d'Or? Well, you could say Pele and Maradona, but they weren't even eligible, so that's kinda cheating, and to be fair, France football eventually said that they would have won if they could, so, at the end of the day, they kinda still got it. Regardless, it could also go for Buffon or Kahn, but they're goalkeepers and those never win, so it doesn't even feel fair. Maybe the second best contender ever would be Ferenc Puskás, but not only was that 60 years ago, but again, if Pele had been eligible, he would have taken that one as well. And so, there's one man left who I think deserved it way more than a lot of people who won it while he was at his prime. I'm talking about Thierry Henry. The man won the World Cup, the Euros, the Confederations Cup, the Intertoto Cup, the Champions League, the Club World Cup, and the European Super Cup. You get it. He won everything. He also broke seemingly every Premier League record ever, won the European Golden Boot twice, made the whole world fall in love with his play style. Even Ronaldinho said he was his favorite player to watch. And still, on the 4 occasions in which he made it to the podium of the Ballon d'Or or FIFA World Player of the Year, someone else won, enraging millions of football fans. But honestly, I think I can justify every single one of Henry's missed opportunities. Let's get into the story. So, right from the start, Henry got recruited off the street and didn't even really want to go to training if it wasn't for his father pretty much forcing him to. As he would put it himself, to say that my dad pushed me is an understatement. When I was a kid, I didn't even like football. But well, when you're really good at something, it's hard not to fall in love with it. And so, very soon, he was getting scouted by Monaco, who suggested he went on trial at Clairefontaine, the greatest academy in the country. 800 kids arrived that day. Henry was one of the 24 who made it. Alongside him were Anelka and Galash. 2 years later, it was closing the season with over 90 goals scored. As the under-18 national team coach would say, Henry was diabolical inside the box. And once the Monaco scouts came back to check on him, his team won the match 6-0. Henry had scored all 6 goals. Normally, Monaco has a strict policy where they only sign kids who have good grades. And well, Henry wasn't the brightest student, but at that point, they just didn't care anymore. And so after 2 years in their academy, a man would come to watch the under-17s practice. He was the first team's coach, the man who would change Henry's life forever. His name was Arsene Wenger, and the moment he saw him, he knew an academy was no place for that kind of talent. In under 300 minutes in his first season, he scored 3 goals. By the end of his second, he joined the French under-18 national team for the Euros and led them to glory, scoring the only goal in the final. By the end of that year, he was named the most promising talent in France. In his 3rd season, he would finally become a regular starter and be instrumental as Monaco won the league. And suddenly, he was signing a contract with Real Madrid. I know, sounds weird, but it really happened. In fact, the only reason he did not move there was that Real Madrid had actually approached him before they even talked to Monaco, leading to a huge lawsuit that eventually allowed the French club to keep the player, who was also very close to getting suspended by FIFA as he had been using an unlicensed agent. Regardless, staying at the club proved to be a good choice. The next year, Henry pulled off a stunning 7 goals in a single Champions League campaign, the second most by any French player in history at the time, as well as 3 assists, pairing up with a young Trezeguet to shock the world by bringing Monaco all the way to the semi-finals. And of course, after a performance like this, there was no denying them. The two were called up to the 1998 World Cup, and though Henry would have to sit out the final after playing in every match, his 3 goals would be enough to make him the national team's top scorer as France became world champions for the first time in their history. Regardless, even before the tournament, Henry had already begun looking for a way out of Monaco as his relationship with new coach Jean Tigana began to sour. His first instinct was to go after Wenger, and in fact, he did almost bring him to Arsenal right then and there, but after that performance at the World Cup, Monaco doubled their asking price, and Wenger, feeling extorted, decided to back out of the deal, allowing Juventus, who were still impressed by his performance against them in the Champions League semi-final, to put down 16.5 million euros for the player, making him the most expensive French player of all time, even though he was just 21 years old. Then playing alongside Zidane at Juventus and with Lippi's full trust behind him, there was no way this could go wrong. Or at least it was the case, until Lippi was sacked 2 weeks later, being replaced by Ancelotti. And look, I love Ancelotti, but at that time, He messed up. At one point, he had Henry playing as a fullback. After half a season, he allowed Luciano Moggi, the godfather of the Calciopoli scandal, to propose to Henry a loan to Udinese, and suddenly, he was not even getting called up to the French national team anymore. Henry was completely lost, but then, thankfully, a friendly face came to the rescue. Henry asked one of the French players at Arsenal to tell Wenger that he would do anything to move there, and sooner than he could have hoped for, Wenger was arriving in town with a check for 16 million euros, a club record signing at the time, to rescue a guy who, by then, was the world's most disappointing Wonderkid. By the way, to make things worse, his friend Trezeguet would be the one to replace him and would end up becoming a club legend at Juve, but that's a story for another video. For now, let's focus on the fact that once at Arsenal, Wenger pulled off one plot twist that not even Henry was expecting. You see, Henry was joining to play alongside his former academy teammate Nicola Anelka, but then he pulled off a tantrum and was gone from the club in a flash, leaving for Real Madrid 24 hours before Henry even set foot in England, and so, being left with no primary goal scorer, Wenger recalled Henry's academy days and decided to put him up front once again. Suddenly, Henry had gone from a tricky Wenger and risky Wonderkid signing to the team's primary goal scorer, tasked with filling the shoes of the recently departed Ian Wright, the club's all-time top scorer. All while not even he himself believed he had what it took to become a goal scorer, saying, "I had no instinct in front of goal, I had to teach myself the art of striking all over again." This was quite simply the scariest moment in all his career. And 3 months and 20 appearances later, the doubters had been proven right. Henry had only scored 2 goals. But then, out of nowhere, he showed everyone why you should never ever rule out a new player after just a few dozen matches, because on the very next match, he scored twice. 1 month later, he was already on 8 goals, and before he knew it, he had gone on a goal-scoring streak spanning across 10 whole matches. And even more shockingly, he would end up scoring in all 6 matches that led up to the UEFA Cup final, where unfortunately the game would end 0-0, with Galatasaray taking the win on penalties without Henry even getting the chance to take one. The UEFA Cup would end up becoming the one international trophy he never won. Regardless, with his rise in notoriety, just 11 days later he had joined France in their quest for the Euros, where once again he'd be essential, scoring in the first match and being the best player on the pitch against the Czech Republic, scoring the opener and assisting the winning goal. Eventually, even scoring the opener once again in the final against Portugal and going on to win the whole thing, once again as the team's top scorer, despite having little to no involvement in the final, watching as Trezeguet scored the golden goal. If you haven't noticed yet, this was one of the problems with Henry. I don't think there is a single all-time great with a worse record in finals than him. He quite simply disappeared every single time. Regardless, even if in his second season at Arsenal his numbers would drop and he would go trophyless, even losing out on the FA Cup final, it didn't matter, because by the end of the year, he had not only been nominated for the Ballon d'Or, but he had caused enough of an impression to finish in 4th place. According to France Football, only Figo, Zidane and Shevchenko were better than this 22-year-old, which only makes it more insane to think that he would never win the award, despite only getting better and better. The following season, even though he would take his numbers to a whole new level with 32 goals and 9 assists, finally edging Van Nistelrooy to the title of Premier League top scorer while taking the league and cup double, he would still disappoint in the cup final as well as in the Champions League, scoring 6 goals in the group stage only to then go missing in the knockouts, which was another common theme in his career. However, next year that wouldn't be a problem, because you see, not only did Henry win the FA Cup with a man of the match performance in the final, but he also hit his prime. I'm talking 60 goal contributions in a season, 32 goals and 28 assists, becoming the first player in history to pull off 20 goals and 20 assists in a league season, with only Messi ever managing to match that feat. Add to all of this a PFA Player of the Year award, the Confederations Cup trophy over summer, with Henry being the top scorer and player of the tournament, and an absurdly good start to the following season, and well, it seemed like Henry had a ridiculously good shot at winning the Ballon d'Or. But well, when the voting took place, not only was Nedved voted for first place nearly 4 times more than Henry, but despite finishing second, he didn't even lead the pack when it came to second place votes. That was Maldini. Most people seem to think that Henry should have placed third, and even in the FIFA Player of the Year, he once again got outvoted, with Zidane taking the first place while he settled for second. But how could this be? Henry's season sounds so perfect. But well, it wasn't. You see, first of all, he wasn't even the Premier League's top scorer. Van Nistelrooy was, the same Van Nistelrooy who took Man United to the Premier League title, while Henry settled for second place. And in the Champions League, Henry scored 7 goals and got 3 assists, which once again sounds great, but he didn't even make it to the knockout stage, meaning that when the entire world was watching, Maldini was lifting the title, Nedved was tearing everything apart, even being seen as a sort of martyr, missing the final and watching as his team collapsed in the shootout 1 inch away from glory. And so, no matter how many goals he scored, could you really give the Ballon d'Or to a player who not only disappointed at the biggest stage, but didn't even win the league? For anyone outside of England, Henry simply wasn't part of the most memorable moments of the year, so how could he be the best player in the world? I'm not saying that I think Nedved deserved it, but I can see how it happened. But look, none of this matters because the following season, Henry took it all even further, leading Arsenal to become the first team in Premier League history to finish the league season without a defeat, becoming forever known as the Invincibles, at one point even scoring a hat-trick against Liverpool to save them from tainting their perfect record, and eventually finishing the season with 30 league goals, also breaking the league's all-time goal-scoring record and taking the PFA Player of the Year once again, as well as the European Golden Boot. But as many claim that this season had been even better than the one before it, once again the Ballon d'Or rankings arrived and Henry was only 4th behind Shevchenko, Deco and Ronaldinho, who also beat him to the FIFA World Player of the Year. So once again, how and why? And again, it's simpler than you may think. The only meaningful contribution Henry put up in the Champions League knockout stages was a performance against Celta de Vigo. Aside from the league, Arsenal took no trophies that year, and when he joined the national team for the Euros, well, they were out in the first round of knockouts. So yeah, if you take into account that back then the Premier League wasn't even the #1 ranked league in the world, the point that when people were actually watching, Henry simply wasn't that great still stands, and maybe even more than before. While Deco won the Champions League and got to the final of the Euros, while Ronaldinho was being Ronaldinho, too many people saw Henry's records as sort of a domestic thing, and so they just looked past him, which is odd considering Shevchenko, who wasn't even the Serie A's top scorer, was the one to win it. But regardless, it was quickly becoming obvious that what Henry really needed to secure the award was a Champions League trophy. That is the one thing nobody can look past. And after a trophyless season where he still managed to become the first player in history to be awarded 2 consecutive European Golden Boots, he finally went all out in 2006, starting the season by finally getting the captain's armband, then surpassing Ian Wright as the club's all-time top scorer, and finally getting a good Champions League knockout stage run, scoring the only goal against Real Madrid, assisting and scoring their 2 goals against Juventus, and eventually arriving at the final after a quiet game against Villarreal, and jump-starting the whole thing by assisting Sol Campbell's opening goal, holding on to the lead until the very last few minutes of the match despite being down to 10 men since the start, only for a 5-minute disaster to allow Barcelona to score twice and take the trophy, leaving Henry close to tears. And if that was bad, imagine how he felt when 2 months later at the World Cup, despite being his nation's top scorer, he once again got to the final, only to watch another of his teammates pull off a madness, getting a red card and leaving his team down to 10 men, eventually losing it all on penalties. Had he won both finals, there would have been no doubt. Had he won at least the World Cup, there would have been a good chance. But instead, he lost both, and so Cannavaro and Buffon, both world champions, placed above him in the Ballon d'Or, forcing him to once again settle down for a place in the podium. But look, somehow he wasn't done yet. After a season that was completely riddled by injuries and saw Arsenal fail to win the league again, speculation that Henry could leave began creeping up, and though Arsenal's chairman insisted that just a year before they had rejected a world record £50 million bid by Barcelona, with the departure of that same chairman, the retirement of Bergkamp a year before, the rumors that Wenger could also be leaving, as well as the move from Highbury to the Emirates, and the fact that Henry was now approaching his 30s and was still yet to win the Champions League, something had clearly become obsessed with. Well, Barca didn't even need to pay the £50 million. Around 20 was enough to secure his move. And well, after a debut season that was deemed disappointing despite the fact that Henry's 19 goals were enough to make him the team's top scorer while also being only second to Messi in assists, Frank Rijkaard left, Guardiola arrived, cleaned up the house and led the team to glory immediately, allowing Henry to put up some of his best Champions League performances ever, with 3 goals against Lyon in the last 16, as well as a goal and an assist against Bayern Munich in the quarterfinals, eventually not only taking the Champions League title but also the sextuple, although Henry will not only be completely overshadowed by his teammates following the quarterfinals, but also in all competitions, as even Eto'o, who Guardiola wanted to offload in the beginning of the season, managed to score 10 more goals than him, leaving everyone with a sense that he moved to Barcelona not in the hopes of having a proper shot at the Champions League title, but with the hope of being carried to it, meaning that once the Ballon d'Or voting came, he finished only 15th, below the likes of Edin Dzeko. And so after being rapidly replaced by Pedro over the next season and then experiencing a disastrous World Cup, Henry retired from European football, only coming back for a month-and-a-half loan spell at Arsenal 2 years later, leaving with a gigantic legacy, but one that was tainted by the lack of the greatest prize of all. Which was not just due to poor timing, but also the fact that over his career, he never scored in a final and only scored 6 Champions League knockout stage goals. For reference, that's less than Mane scored in just his debut season.